Hello, everyone. This is Lee again from Akathame. Thank you for joining us today. We are live on LinkedIn and YouTube. And as you watch our presenters today and you have questions, please put them in the comment section of any platform that you're on. They'll appear in front of us and we'll get to them as quickly as we can. Thank you to everyone who sent questions ahead of time. I am quickly trying to get them into the Q&A here, and we'll get to them as we can. But we're going to get started now. And let me just make sure that I can see everybody's comments here on LinkedIn. Give me just a second. And while I am doing that, I am going to allow our speakers to introduce themselves. We have Julia Stewart and we have Alex Salas. And if you guys could just give us a 1-minute introduction as to who you are and what you do, and we'll get right into today's topic.
Go ahead, Julia.
Okay, so I'm Julia. I'm a product design leader. I've been building education products from back in the day of CD-ROM to present. I'm passionate about partnering with my colleagues and teams into integrating research-based practices into learning applications. Most recently, I was a VP of user experience and product design at Discovery Education, affiliated with Discovery, and we develop K-12 curriculum, assessment, and learning tools. And prior to that, I was a founding member of K-12 that was a homeschooling and virtual charter school online learning platform.
K-12 was one of my first clients when I started working with Brent. I mean, years and years ago. Oh my gosh, Julia, have we known each other that long? Do we go back that far?
Apparently we do.
Oh my goodness. Alex, how about you?
All right. Well, thank you so much, Lee, for having me here. It's awesome. And hello, everybody. My name is Alex Salas. I'm a learning and development professional in general. I started as a training facilitator back about 15 years ago after I left the Navy. I'm a U.S. Navy veteran. I was what is known a hospital corpsman or combat medic, but don't call us medics, and in the Navy. And from there, I kind of sparked my interest in the education field and health education. And from health education, I jumped immediately into corporate learning because I didn't know that it was a profession. So had the master's degrees, the certifications in the background. You can check my LinkedIn profile. I've worked for Fortune 100 companies for the last 15 years. And recently, about 3 months ago, I started my own firm for e-learning consulting, which is StarLearn. And what you see behind me here is e-learning Launch, which is the online academy to help anyone that wants to become a learning designer do so. So that's what takes my time today. Most of my time, but I love getting into these conversations, and thank you for having me here.
Oh, thank you both. That's I did not realize that you had a Navy background. I'm sorry that escaped me. Well, thank you for all that you've done for this country and all that you continue to do for the people in this space. So let's get right into it. We could have a very interesting and controversial discussion around this topic because learning is quite the sensitive subject for leaders and for managers as well as for individuals. So let's start with the generic purpose for this call, for this session. It's because I wanted to understand what are the foundations. And let me back up for just a second. Julia comes from that K through 12 learning. So this is not corporate learning, and that's very different. I come from a secondary school education, right? I'm a high school teacher. So that's a different kind of learning. And then you've got corporate learning, which is where Alex has really sunk his teeth into, which I also have 10 years of experience in. So very different forms of education. So what is the foundation? There's got to be this through line, if you will, of what constitutes great training, solid learning, and then tying that to performance. So that's what we're going to talk about today in comparing those three things. And I want to start first with Julia. When you look at your audience, how are you measuring impact? Let's start there.
Well, I think the important thing before you measure impact is where you headed, right? So one of the things the research shows us is that if we can move the teacher from being the sage on the stage to the guide on the side, so they become more of a facilitator or a coach, then you give students more agency. And even at a young age, you start helping students take more control of their own learning. Because if we're going to become lifelong learners, right, we have to start learning to do that at a young age. And some of the ways you do that is you have to kind of start with helping the students understand their goal. So we used to frame lesson objectives in the students will. Now we have I can statements. So right on the board, the students see I can XYZ, and they put it into their language. And we also, when we start a class, we make sure we understand where students are. They call this like a check for understanding, right? So kind of like GPS, if you and Alex and I were all different places, but we knew the goal we were going, if I gave the same directions to all of us, but we had a different starting place, I would never get there, right? So I first have to check and see where everybody is, and then I can move forward. And through doing what they call formative assessment, which is just, checks for understanding, this takes place best in what K-12 calls a think, pair, share. So that's like when you get together and you share and you talk about, a question. And what's really cool about that is it's just like product design. We have to iterate. We have to talk to our customers. The same for teachers and coaches. They check in with the students constantly and change their instruction. So it's an interactive, ongoing piece. But at the point you mentioned, Lee, the performance, how do you then take all that great knowledge and put it into what they call authentic real world tasks? They have something called performance-based assessment or performance-based learning, right? And that really is taking, for example, we developed a math, what we call tech book, where we would help them with understanding formulas, and they develop fluency through multiple choice questions with feedback. But the big thing was then applying that to a real world situation, right? And performance tasks generally are open-ended. They're what we call a constructed response. You answer a question in a real world setting, and it's really tied to someone's actual job. So you might have, someone in the field, and you create this scenario and the students have to answer that. And those performance tasks are really where K-12 education is moving. Now, how do you measure? You asked me, how do you measure that and how they're doing? And they use something called rubrics, which is simply a way to score performance along a set of numbers. So for those who don't know rubrics, really, it's like a set of criteria, a set of numbers. Is it, met well, very well, excellent? And then what they call indicators, which are examples of that. And then so teachers can then see how the students are doing on this complex, rich, authentic task. And it really helps students solidify and understand that knowledge and grow. So it's really that shift. It's less about a shift from offline to online or to digital. They talk about this digital transformation. And it's more about a shift in how we use these research-based practices to get students to not only transfer the knowledge from the teacher, but assimilate and use that knowledge.
Wow. Okay. And so, Alex, from your perspective, how does that translate?
Well, I think some of the things that Julia mentioned there, we can translate almost to good practices in learning and development in the corporate setting. But interestingly enough, it's not usually what you will see as the majority of the practice done, right? So in corporate learning, there's specific things we have to get really concerned with. So first of all, we have learning sciences that go back 50, 60 years, right? We have great examples from the military in terms of the instructional systems that can be developed to produce mass effectiveness of mass audiences across different regions, and applied instructional systems to actually get the results that you need to get. But really it comes down to basic stuff, which is, the business needs performance. The business needs people to do their work and do it well and feel great about how, what great attitude they have. And that's the key thing. It's not about running an academy. It's not about running a university in your workplace. It's, you can use those things to kind of build foundational knowledge if people don't really know what they're doing, right? They have no idea. But for the most part, you have to focus on performance. So the context is very important. If you have an employee that has 10, if you hire me to be an instructional designer for you, I surely hope you're not putting me in the LMS to take courses about instructional design, right? All I need to know is what are your processes? How do you get work done? Because the way you do it may be completely different to what any other organization is doing it. And so I apply my background knowledge, what I have in experience, and I perform based on the standards that you have. So if you think about rubrics and standards, it's pretty much what we're looking at. The main issue that we have, though, the complexities that we have in corporate learning is that not every organization is an elite organization. Not every organization documents their processes. Not every organization has a good structure of knowledge data. So in those organizations, you have performance problems. And the performance problems are not going to be fixed with training. So you run this cycle where people are going to keep coming back to you going, hey, Julia just messed up. We need training, right? And then we go, okay, well, let's put Julia to training instead of asking questions about it.
Right.
Instead of figuring out if there's a problem with the system that Julia is working in, right? So there's a problem with the environment. There's a problem with Julia's situation. There's a problem, all those things we don't figure out in many cases, and we're running to the whole training loop. Well, we trained Julia. 2 months later, Julia messes up again. Let's put Julia to training. So, the cycle goes on and on and on. The other challenge that we have in corporate learning is that we apply a compliance model to everything. And what that means is that every business has to do compliance training. So everything else that gets developed for training seems to be treated as a compliance element, a compliance experience. And we know the compliance experiences are horrible because compliance by itself, the word, kind of tickles your adult learning sentiment to reject it to begin with, right? Lee, I need you to be compliant. Could you please not? So I know that doesn't work well with Lee. So the ideal thing is what? In corporate learning, what we're trying to do is get people to perform their jobs better. And to perform the jobs better, we need to understand everything in a systemic way and be able to do an assessment and address the things that really are the problem and not so much address the symptoms of the problem.
So you guys just said a lot. So when we look at the foundation of both of what you're both doing, right? This is really important to understand. So when I think of education in terms of K through 12, I think of giving learners a foundation of history, of science, of math, the foundation of what, will interest them, but to also prepare them as a baseline knowledge of what they might need to go about and live in this world and function in this world, right? Then as they get to higher education, they start to really focus on what they want to master, so to speak, right? At varying degrees, and then they select that education. When you're talking about corporate learning, is that about right, Alex?
Yeah, I'm talking corporate learning, yeah.
Yeah. So when we talk about corporate learning, however, we're talking about very specific behaviors and outcomes to apply to produce something, a specific outcome, right? To achieve a specific outcome. Right. So the foundations that I'm hearing from both of you are understanding, research, assessment. What are we really trying to do here? And the next is creating that content that says this is going to be the way that this is what you need to learn. The piece that I think that where people get stuck is exactly what you mentioned, Alex. Is it a performance issue? Is it a training issue? Is it a learning issue? Does that person have the capability and capacity to learn? So now you're going even deeper. Julia, from your perspective, when you launch a new program for K through 12, and you're targeting teachers, that's right? You're targeting educators and students.
Teachers and students, yes.
Right. So how do you decide which modality to use to get to these audiences? Because those are two very distinct and different audiences. Adult versus child, number one.
Right, right. And it's really about, for teachers, let's say, supporting them in understanding what are the goals first we're trying to achieve, right? And let's be clear on that. And then they call it backwards design. You first look at where you're headed, what the result is. Then you look at the evidence that's going to support that result. What does that evidence look like to say that I've gotten there? Right? That's the rubric indicators. It will look like this, right? It'll model. And then you layer on the teaching strategies. Is it a peer-to-peer collaboration? Is it a lecture? Is it a, I watch the video off to the side? So we really try to involve the teachers by understanding the design of the curriculum. If you just hand over something without explaining kind of why it all comes together and how you can use it, then it's not as useful. Understanding by design or backward design, if people want to look that up more. And for the students, it's really, we went out and talked to students just like we went out and talked to teachers, and understand that they do need different modalities. Some want to read online and some don't. Some don't want all the browsers around them and they just want a focused view. So you help that by giving them different opportunities, modalities to learn, whether it's text to speech or whether, giving them different options and choice. That's how we would go about it.
So that's interesting. So now we're giving kids this choice, right? So when I was going to school, there was no choice. There was no choice.
Well, I'm telling you to do it, right?
Right. This is the way it's getting delivered, and you're going to learn. Now there's just so many ways and so many avenues. So and I'm curious about this. How is that choice reflecting in the outcome? I mean, do those various modalities pay off, or are we still using the same type of modality to reach those kids?
Well, I'll tell you, for our science textbook, for example, the biggest student achievement gains were with the kids that struggled the most, either ESOL students or English language learners, because we had a Spanish to English translator. We had 2 different levels of reading, Lexile levels for the same thing. So being able, and it wasn't necessarily that they were choosing, but the teacher could choose what was the best and support them, especially at the younger age. Maybe at the older age, you're able to go back and forth and see the English to Spanish. But having that right there, I mean, that's something that technology can do to support you. So that's where we found it helped folks the most, is those who were kind of struggling to get up to speed with the others.
Nice. Alex, I'm going to pose the same question to you. Adult learners, that's a whole different ball game. Their attention span, their ability to retain information, how they absorb information. What are you seeing as being the challenges and the most effective ways? And are you offering choices, and what are those choices? I guess that was like 5 questions in one.
Well, yeah, my focus today pretty much is closing the gap between the academic path and the actual needs the employers have. So corporate learning needs the specific things for people to do, and then the academics or the higher ed institutions are doing something completely different, or they're going their own path. So they're sort of creating researchers, and corporate learning needs people that can actually do the work, create projects, work samples, things like that. So one of the problems that we have right now is, people come out with a degree, with a master's degree, they contact me all the time on LinkedIn. Hey, I just graduated, can't find a job, need some help, this and that, right? And that's because the skills that are needed are not there. The skills about talking about theory, they're always there. And the ability to do research is always there. So adult learners in corporate learning, the adult learners, we have been talking about, there's been theories on this going back probably about 44, 50, 60, 70, probably 80 years, if we go over Dewey and Thorndike and everything else. So in reality, what we're talking about is, we have to understand the knowledge, context, and application of the tasks that are involved, right? So if someone has 20 years of experience in a subject matter, you hire that person for that purpose. What are you going to need to give that person to be able to do what they need to do for you, what you hire them for? And so you have to understand, you have to know what that person needs. You have to know what that person needs to do the job, because that's not the same need for someone that's been doing it for 5 years And not to say that, I know we rely on years of experience, obviously, right? But I'm also a dissenter in that sense, because I can spend 5 years working on something every day and be way better than someone that says has been doing it for 10 years. But regardless of that matter, the adult learner has different responsibilities than a child does. And those are probably the key things we want to get in mind, right? The adult learner goes to work, to do work, not to learn. They're not going to pass a grade. They're not going to take a course. That's not their main purpose. That's not their interest. Only instructional designers think to think this way. And I'm one, right? So the adult learner is going to get the work done. Yes, they're busy. Many of them, if you think of a manager, I've seen managers that all they do is just take phone calls all day, right? Because they're doing meetings. And I always wonder, okay, what's the productivity of that? Is that anything driving to anything? But in any event, the adult learner has a social responsibility, right? So they might have a family. They have, they want to do great at their job because maybe they have a career in mind, or maybe they need to pay bills, or maybe it's both of them, and it's all of that. So a child is not thinking about those things when they're engaging in a learning activity. A child is many times is being told to go learn something, right? And that's just our education system at this point. Regardless of, even if you give them a choice, and you're not ramping on you, Julie. I'm just saying, even if you give that person a choice, the kid is there because it's being told, hey, you need to go to school from Monday to Friday. All right.
Right. What are you saying?
Yeah. And so I have 3 kids. My 17-year-old, I have conversations with him about different things. My 14-year-old as well is about to go to high school, and I ask questions about it. So what do you learn today? What are you doing? And usually sometimes the answers are good, but sometimes the answers are like useless. I don't know why I'm learning this. Why are we talking about this stuff? So obviously we need an overhaul in the educational system. And I hope that the work that Julia is doing kind of helps with that, because, that's what I see, that redesigning the spaces and redesigning everything else helps. But the adult learner, in essence, look, it's a different person. It's a person that has autonomy to begin with, a high sense of autonomy and self-respect. And so if you don't consider those things, if you don't respect those things, then you will lose the person's engagement in any activity. So if I tell you to go take a course and I don't say why, and I don't explain the impact that will have in what you do, then most likely you're going to challenge. You may do it because your manager, the boss, told you to do it, but it's just, I'm going to get there, trying to find the quiz and get out of the way. Right? It
has to be relevant and authentic to you, right? Like it has, you have to understand not only the what it is, but the why I'm doing it, as well as
right. So there are practices we do that help with that, right? Like don't lock navigation, like allow people to make choices, like Julia's saying. My wife doesn't like watching videos. She has no patience for it. She says, "Can you just give me a PDF? Just give me something to read. I get it and I apply it." But great, you have to, and I think that's what people when they talk about learner center, in a way, maybe that's what we're addressing. But again, in this industry, in learning and development, there's a lot of fluff because we have a lot of consultants, and you're always being sold the next best thing.
So we did get a question. Was sent to me, and I wanted to share this based on what you had just said, Alex. So when your children are the content, I just cut this short, and to Cecilia, I'm sorry I cut it short, but it was a paragraph, Cecilia. Whoops. The question is that when my kids come home from school, I ask them the same question: what did you learn today? And more often than not, nothing comes out of their mouths. But sometimes I do get a good response. What should I expect? Should every learning moment from a child or even as an adult always result in an aha moment, something learned? Go ahead.
Can I jump in there? Because that is a learning strategy, is called reframing. So like part of the peer-to-peer instruction is I'm going to turn to my peer and talk about my answer and help convince them to my answer, right? So when you ask a student that, they have to reframe what they learn. Now, they may or may not be able to do that yet, right? Some days they can, and that may or may not mean that they have that aha moment. It's also if they're able to communicate that. And part of it is also helping them by asking leading questions. So not just what happened today, but when you were in science today and I saw you do that lab with the sand in the kitchen, like break it down to be more specific and more what they call scaffolded, and that can help. And that helps as the students talking about it get to it. And I agree, you're not always going to have the aha moments, but it's that continuous practice and what they call spaced out practice of being able to talk about things that really is what the research says solidifies that knowledge in us.
Okay. What do you think, Alex?
So the question specifically is, remind me.
Should every teaching moment result in an aha moment?
Yeah, so the aha moment, I think it's just a matter of how we look at it. And also, we use words, a lot of words that are ambiguous at times. So we mentioned here a few times understanding, right? And that means that could be completely different to whatever my expectation is or your expectation or someone's expectation. So we know the aha moment is that thing where we're like, I got it, right? Like, yes, right? I got it. Oh, that's oh, yeah, right? So cool. That's great. That's the aha moment. And that's usually, if we think of cognitive structures, that could be a confirmation of, the interchange between short-term memory and long-term memory and the ability to retrieve back from there and apply context to it. And that's what allows you to reflect on that and go like, that's what it is. I mean, I had that. I mean, I've seen that Monday, but wow, now, I know. So
does that take a little more time for adult learners sometimes than children, or is it does make a difference?
No, I don't think there's a difference in that. I mean, maybe there's some physiological studies out there that may give us that, but I think that if anything, probably the aha moment is more powerful for adults because there's more context around it. With children, the aha moment, I'm thinking, if I'm learning about you got to understand that there's a difference here. When we go to school, we're learning about topics. And when we go to corporate learning, we need to be learning about tasks.
That's right.
So one is doing something, the other one is about topics. And there may be some exercises in there, but it's a topic, it's a subject, right? So biology, chemistry, whatever, right? Sometimes, in most cases, if you got a great teacher, you got that straight relevance given to you as to, hey, we're going to show you how the cell works and how this affects what this and that, right? But what if you have a kid that doesn't really care about science? Like, why am I listening about this? Like, all I care about is video games. I want to learn how to do video games, how to make video games. Okay, so maybe
science of video games.
You need to be talking about math, and you need to be talking about game theory, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But they don't get that opportunity until they get to higher ed. So the main thing is when we're talking about the aha moment, I think it's more powerful in adults because it's related. It's really relevant and direct to action, and it's action that will lead to my intrinsic reward system. So my intrinsic motivation, meaning what I desire as a professional. So if I learn, for example, I'll give you an example of this. If I'm trying to learn a new authoring tool, right? For two reasons. Why? Because maybe I want to offer it as a new course in my academy, or two, because I'm working for an organization and now I can deliver things in a better way, in a more entertaining and interactive way. I might try to take some courses on that on my own, right? And, I might struggle. And then at a certain point, I get the concept, right? I get like, oh, I can use this, and oh, yes. So now that becomes a new skill. That's the thing, right? It becomes a new skill. When you got a kid in school to learn about a topic in biology, does that become a new skill?
Yeah.
It's a question. So
yeah, good question. So we got more questions coming in. So I want to make sure, I'm hoping I can save you guys some time and get, if we don't get to all these questions, I'll give them to you to follow up. But if we can keep this succinct, we will try to end a little bit early to give everybody some time to get through everything. So So here's another question, and this I think is a good one. Is instructor-led training in a classroom going away completely?
That's an easy one.
Well, I gotta tell you, I think when you've got such a definitive answer or question like that, I automatically go to no. So I'm curious as to what you guys think.
It's a no. I mean, it's
No.
a no because it's against all human interaction. That's just what it is. I mean, besides the fact that you have a huge industry depending on that modality to begin with, right? But talking just in the essence of humanity, right? We got to look at how everything ties together. I mean, I like talking to people and I like being in group settings, but I also love technology, right? And a lot of what I learned is from other people, but it's not directly. It's asynchronous because I'm using technology to my advantage. But the main thing is, look, that's not from our educational system. You got to look at our educational system. What is it teaching? What is it giving as a value? It's collaboration, work together, stuff like that, as you're a kid. So you go through 20 years of schooling or more doing that. How is that going to change when you go work in somewhere? You expect your training to be a classroom. You expect that environment to be the same. It's just against our nature, right? I mean, even cognitively.
Yeah.
So that from all those reasons, I mean, we can throw the emotional stuff in there, of course, but I mean, from those bases, no, it's not going away.
Julia?
I would say it's shifting, right? If you're interested in this, there's a really great video by a guy named Eric Mazur, M-A-Z-U-R, who's a Harvard's physics professor. And he has a YouTube on memorization versus understanding. And he kind of goes through how he first learned to teach as an expert. He was just lecturing, right? And then he realized that, hey, the lecture can happen beforehand, asynchronously, right? People can read about this, but in the classroom, that's where we're going to have more of a Socratic method. Like, we're going to ask a question, people are going to respond, they're going to talk to one another. We're going to use these research-based principles of collaboration. And as you said, Alex, that's exactly what you have to do in the workplace. You have to learn to collaborate. You have to learn to work through questions together. You have to learn to argue, kind of say, well, I think it's this versus that. These are all the skills that if you learn as a young child, you can then carry forward into the workplace. And that instructor is really important to guide you along the way. They have to come up with questions that are just right for the class. Is it too hard, too easy? There won't be a authentic conversation, right? And if they don't come up with those great what they call performance-based assessments at the end, where you actually are applying it to a skill in real world, then you're not ultimately helping the students get into the workplace. As you said, there's that disparity between the two. So I would say they're not going away, but they're shifting their role.
Cool.
I will add one last thing. I think the only thing that may change that could actually make this happen will be if companies transition into remote work for the future. Because then you don't have a way of doing it. You'll be doing it through webinars like this.
Have you done, one thing I thought was really cool is breakout rooms. So some of these types of things have breakout rooms where I was in a session with 20 people and then the facilitator broke us out randomly into 2 pairs. So it's kind of like that think, pair, share. We had a question we had to work on and then come together. So you're right, there needs to be new ways to do it, but I think we need to use the same strategies.
It's interesting because I'm taking a sales training course completely remote for 25 or 30 people in the coming weeks. And everything I'm doing is online and using completely outside of Zoom, which I've used for years. I'm using Mira, which is a collaboration tool. I'm using all kinds of different technologies to keep everybody engaged. They're all adult learners and they have a very specific goal with this training, which is to increase sales. So it's a lot of work to transfer that from a classroom, which was a 2.5-day classroom program, to online. So it'll be interesting to see how this flies.
The other part is that you have to take extra time to address cognitive load for that experience.
That's right.
Breakout rooms, for example, I've done them before, and the first few ones were a disaster because people don't know what they're doing, and you have to explain how it works, and you have to, and then it's weird. So it's like, oh, okay, so now we're like 5 people in this room, but we can't hear what anybody else is saying. That type of thing. Yeah, it can be done, but there's a lot of preparation that you have to do.
A lot of work.
Ease people into it. So,
and it's hard to even do it with K-12 students because you can't have 2 students in a room by themselves, right? There's other issues, and that you have to have a moderator there. So
right.
Which leads to our next question. I'm going to combine a couple of questions here. There was a question about what's your preferred technology, and then there's a specific question on gamification for adults and children in learning. How does this platform improve learning outcomes and performance for the adult and for the child? Well, these are great questions, everybody. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So gamification, well, for children, it's kind of innate right now because, I mean, your 2-year-old people, I know the people are there giving this kid an iPad and like, yo, see you later. But I mean, for adults, I mean, gamification, first of all, to kind of explain that, because maybe some people may not know what that is. So gamification is the application of game mechanics to something that wasn't inherently a game, right? And game mechanics, what is it? Well, usually it's like rules, like the rules of a game. So if you think of Monopoly, everybody here, if I say let's play Monopoly, you probably have done it and you know what the rules are, right? What happens when I pass it to go?
You get $100. Yeah.
There you go.
Did they lower it? I thought it was $200.
Yeah, it's 200.
I remember that.
Okay. Let's not play Monopoly. No, just kidding. So yeah, but so in gamification, the main thing is, look, it was brought to life based on marketing campaigns, right? And if you think about it, anything you do in marketing right now, reward systems and everything else is pretty much modifying your behavior. So you either buy more of the product or you like more of the brand. So do you think gamification works or does not work? I mean, if you can use it to get people to like more of a brand and buy more of a product, then, well, can you use it to get people more engaged into learning activities? Well, of course, there could be something like that.
Yeah. How does that play with kids, Julia?
I've also heard the term invisible learning. And like Alex was saying, it's about that motivation and reward system. And so we kind of used gamification for practice. So in math, they had multiple choice where they got scaffolded responses to each thing they chose. But then once they had that fluency, they played a game where they just were going through those questions and practicing. And as they went along, they kind of got an award for each piece. So, it has to be done well, right? It does take a lot to kind of get it done well. But I think we're going to be seeing more and more of this quote unquote like invisible learning or ways of using this type for learning outcomes and performance. Yeah.
Terrific.
Yeah. So yeah, I do a lot of gamification, and you just gotta. I would just recommend anybody that whoever asked the question, first of all, and anybody that's interested, to probably read up on some of the research. There are three different things or branches of diversions of what we're talking about. Gamification is the most superficial stuff. You have serious games and you have edutainment, and so all of those things lead to different avenues. So sometimes edutainment is not really something that you can apply so much for effectiveness, but it all depends on what you're trying to achieve.
Okay, so now we're getting some serious questions here, even more than we already have. Next one is, how do you work with senior leaders about training around culture and performance? So culture seems to be a big thing. And I'm very curious because when you look at where you came from, Julia, K through 12, discovery is all about opening up the mind, right? So talk to me about how culture played into learning and development within your organization.
So the culture of the organization?
I'm not quite sure. So how do senior leaders about training? So okay. So apparently their culture is not a believer in learning, in training. It's So I guess it's how do you get that culture of learning, the buy-in from the leader?
Well, for us, it was easy because that's everything we did, right? It was imbued into everything. Like if we had a meeting, you had to start with, with that maxim of design with the end in mind. You had to say, well, what do we want to achieve in this meeting? You had to start with the outcome first, right? But for those who don't have that background, I think it really is bringing research to the fore. And I'm sure Alex will have more to say about this. But I recently heard Google, did a study about what worked in terms of overall culture and performance. And it was really about psychological safety. And you may have seen that study. So, it's bringing, so that's about culture, right? Like, can I make mistakes and it's still okay, right? Can I research and collaborate with folks that are me? What does that culture say? Can I go and innovate on something else? So it's looking at the research that shows the business, to say, look, research has shown that developing a culture is really key to performance.
Interesting. I'm putting this psychological safety up there. So again, Alex, what have you worked with companies or with clients where it was an uphill battle to say learning is great, but you guys have to look at the culture around learning and why you're doing this? How does that fit?
Well, yeah, it always is because, understanding the history of what happened with workplace learning, it's the key thing, right? I mean, companies used to hire high-end educational psychologists and consultants and stuff like that, teams of those folks to apply then a specific engineering process. Now, if you're thinking about it that way, that's a lot of money. That's a ton of money.
Yeah.
So at certain points, businesses went, well, this is great, but no, too much money, right? Can we find an easier way to do this? And that led to the creation of ADDIE, which was, the ADDIC framework created for systems training approach. So that was the intent of ADDIE. ADDIE was to make something complex, make it dumb it down, basically, right? Dumb it down so anyone can do it. So anyone can read those stages, those processes, and then produce something of quality. Well, we know that doesn't work that way. It's not a thing that it can be just easily done that way. And then every organization has unique needs. So to working with senior leaders are always going to be like the business. They're going to be concerned about what? They're going to be concerned about costs. They're going to be concerned about business, the bottom line. So if you are full of fluff in your practice, you don't back it up with research like Julia was saying, and research, doesn't have to be academic research. Research can just be you understanding the business. And ideally, that's the best thing, right? Understand the business, know the business. And I try to not use understand so much because, again, it's ambiguous. But know the business, know what happens in the business, what are the important things for the business. So you can then align your learning solutions to those needs. You can identify the needs to begin with. You can easily point those needs out because otherwise the business just thinks, I need training, right? And we're running through that loop again. So senior leaders, when we talk about culture is not an overnight thing. Culture is a leadership thing. You need leadership to be behind that. It's not an L&D thing. And you have to pretty much assess with the leadership what are the values, what is of value to the leadership.
They have to understand
that there are great outcomes, sure, but some leadership may not care. They used to be like, hey, just make me some training, all right? Doesn't really matter, right? And then if you can try to turn that around, but again, it's got to be a leader-supported thing. If you don't have leadership behind it, and how do you get leadership behind it? Well, you get leadership behind it by showing that it has an impact on the business.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're going to have one more technology question, and then I've got the last question about your careers. So the one technology question is, what is your preferred? Here it is. What's your preferred technology for online learning and LMSs? Okay, Alex, how about yours?
Um, well, I mean, I don't have per se a preferred technology. If we're talking online learning and LMSs, a learning management system, you have 60 vendors out there. If you think about it, is a website with a backed repository of databases, so it can hold context and data about and your objects for learning, right? So you have multiple vendors out there for that. If we're, I'm not really going to mention names, but I think the interesting thing is that today, the most interesting thing probably I can say here is like, look, you can look at the best-selling LMSs out there, and that's all news. That's like they've been there already 20 years. The interesting thing is that today you have platforms that are cloud-based, online academies for online academy platforms, and they work as well as an LMS. So they could actually be way more affordable and as functional as what you're dealing with LMS vendors. So, one of those examples is Thinkific, which is what we use for eLearn Launch.
What is it called?
Thinkific.
Scientific.
Yeah, the word think, like thinking, and ific at the end.
Thinkific. Okay.
Thinkific, yeah.
Okay. I'm not even going to try, but whoever asked that question. Great.
Yeah.
Julia, do you have any that you prefer for your platform?
Not particularly that I prefer, but I've followed some like Schoolology. They have a good blog think tank with them. I think what I would look at when I'm evaluating online learning or LMS is, are they integrating these research-based practices into the software? So is there a place for a teacher to easily give feedback, right, directly to the students? Is it saving me time as a teacher so that I can grade quickly, right? I don't have to, if I'm a middle school student teacher and I have 150 students and I have to open each PDF 150 times all day, no, next. It's some of the simple things. Is it supporting me as a coach to students so that I can spend my best quality time with students differentiating the content? Does it allow me to differentiate the content? Does it give me suggestions for doing that? Does it have different lexile levels, different languages? So I would look at the criteria that matches the research-based practices as to what supports, good learning outcomes, and make sure that the software supports that.
Terrific. Yeah. I think that's an excellent suggestion. It really does come down to doing a needs analysis and doing research about the end users and what they really want out of that product. Yeah. So here is I can't believe it's our last question. Boy, you guys are whizzing through these. All right, let's see. The next one is, how did you decide which career track to take in learning and development? How did you decide your career path?
Well, in my case, I think it was just a matter of maybe a little bit of destiny and a little bit of interest. I mean, just like anything else, I'm a firm believer you can't learn anything if you're not interested in it. So from that perspective, I was teaching military people. I was teaching my military subordinates and whatnot in the team. I was helping them study for the promotion tests, because you have to take a test in the Navy to promote, as well as also have your performance review, right? So, but the test is something that was hurting a lot of people. A lot of people, some people are not good test takers. Some people don't study, that type of stuff. So I developed this study techniques, and that got great results with them, where I got a lot of people promoted. So for me, that was obviously got me that dopamine hit, and I got rewarded, right? Like, oh yeah, I did something great for them. That's awesome. And then from there, I saw someone attended a class for smoke cessation or something like that. And I looked at the job of the person giving the class, and I go like, this is a pretty cool job. Like, I didn't know you could just go around teaching these classes and just make some good money or whatever, right? So health education was my interest. So I started studying that. And from there, that led to one class that was an adult learning theory. And there was questions about certifications, like, should you get a certification and who will you get certified from? And then I heard about ATD, and then I heard about, other bodies out there. So Then I realized that there was an industry. Then I realized that there were jobs. And then I went to get a master's in training and development. I went just straight for that. I wanted a master's in training and development. So I got degrees before I started working. The first job I had, though, was as a trainer, as a facilitator. And really a trainer. I was a PowerPoint assassin when I started. Right? That's what I was. I mean, and I had no shame about that. I did have some creative design skills on the PowerPoints. But besides that, it was PowerPoint assassinations, right? Death by PowerPoint. So, but from there, I just realized, okay, there's got to be a better way. This is not, it's got to be a better way to do things that people can always come back and check their progress, check what they're doing. And that's what led me to e-learning. So from there, I figure, okay, learning development, instructional design, those two things are synonymous today. Maybe it wasn't so much 20 years ago, but today, when somebody hires an instructional designer and you look at a job description, what do you see? You need to know about 20 applications, right? So that's why, I'm doing what I'm doing. But yeah, that's how I led to that.
Excellent. I'd say that's a pretty good way to manage your career.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Julia?
So I remember the moment I was in a biology class at Oberlin College, and I was learning about the lock and key mechanisms of enzymes and how they fit together. And I just it in my head in 3D. Now, this is a time, and I'm dating myself, when there were mainframes and we were just starting getting laptops, right? So I'm just learning about this multimedia thing, right? Wasn't even a thing. Hyperlinks wasn't a thing yet. But I had this in my mind that I thought that you could really learn in this rich way. Who would know later I would be into AR and VR and 3D, learning and the different things that I went into. At the time, my degree was in cultural anthropology, which I didn't realize was really helpful because it allows you to look at the big picture and the small details, see patterns, do contextual inquiry, do ethnographies, right? But I got out of school and there was I wasn't about to, go to the Aboriginals somewhere. I was just still here. So I decided to start I worked in a higher education association here in DC and started learning about desktop publishing and design. And this was when Illustrator 88, if you remember, before it was even 1, 2, 3, 4. I just started learning and taking classes in design and moved into doing CD-ROM design. And as Alex said, you always ask that next question, what is the best next thing? So I would design screens, but I realized, well, if they're not organized very well or the language isn't good, it doesn't matter how pretty it is. I moved into information design and information architecture, working with databases and working with personalization. And I worked for Philips Design in Eindhoven and helped them kind of look at their website presence. And then I got called back into education at K-12 Inc. And had the opportunity to lead and build the team there after having a lot of experience with design and information architecture. And that's when I moved more into building teams and systems and getting more into business use cases and analysis and really working closely with the engineers. And that's really a sweet spot I love, is sitting between the subject matter experts and the engineers and helping them get involved with the voice of the customer, because it's that. To me, what's fun about it is it's that collaborative, creative process, right? So I get to learn every day. As some people said, it's more fun to make this stuff than actually use it, right? Because you're learning, especially with technology, you're learning something every day. So that's just a little bit about my background and how I got there.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And one thing that is a common thread between the two of you is that you're learners. You love learning.
Mm-hmm.
You're passionate about learning, and what excites you is passing on what you know, and that's the heart of a good teacher, right? And so that's what makes it really work a lot of times for the attendee, for the participant, for the student, is they feed off of that energy and that passion for what you know, and just that alone makes that interaction, that learning moment successful. And I have one question, and this is for to round things out for today's call. Let's wrap it up. So what are the key things? What are the 3, 4, 5, whatever it is? What is the foundation in your mind of performance-based learning? Give these people a checklist to say, I need to think about this. this is what I should take away from today's call?
You know, I if you don't mind, I'll jump in. I went to the performance-based learning sites and kind of gathered this. And there's really 4 or 5 things. But one is that, as I mentioned before, it's like checking the understanding, you know, where are they now and do they know where they're headed? Then the next is that peer instruction and formative assessment. So having people collaborate together. So it's not just a lecture, right? It's having people collaborate together. The reason that's important, though, is so that the teacher can iterate and understand are the questions at the right level. You don't want to do a summative assessment at the end of class and not know where students are. You need to adjust your own teaching and coaching as you're going along, right? So you're almost applying what we do in product to that. And then it's quality and timely feedback. Back to that GPS metaphor. You know, if you're 20 miles off base and then you find out that you're off base, you know, it's too late. Or if you're 20 miles off base and they don't tell you which direction to go, which is action-oriented, goal-directed, how do I get back towards my goal specifically? Then that feedback is not very useful, right? So it's the quality and the timeliness of the feedback is an important part of performance-based learning. And then it's back to that authentic learning task. And though K-12 is about topics, they're really trying to change, especially in science and math, to apply that topic. So how do I apply that math in a real world problem? How do I apply that science principle in a real world problem and have it be open-ended, you know, where I can really figure out how to apply what I've learned to that and not just, you know, answer towards the test. But there's a lot you can look up on that topic.
Yeah, that's excellent. Excellent way to wrap it up. And Alex, what about you?
Yeah, and I want to say, Julia, you're right. The schools are some, you know, it's interesting. Some teachers are doing it and some teachers may not, but it's good to see that there is evidence of that projects are being worked on that are sort of, you know, real life situations. Well, from my end, you know, there's a very simple thing to, you know, obviously you heard about me and what I talked about today is very complex. It could be. But the foundations is, look, there's something to be accomplished. And that usually is represented in business needs. So if you're going to learn about how to approach those things, look up HPT, Human Performance Technology, and make sure you read stuff that has been around now for 40 or 50 or more years for Gary Rumler. But in LinkedIn, there's a guy named Guy Wallace. So salutations to Guy Wallace. He's probably your best research for all of that. So you can then think about the design pieces you can apply into that. But regardless of all that, you need to identify the needs. What are the business needs? What is the need to be done, right? What is it that people need to do? Then from there, you have to address whether the need is going to be a performance support situation, training, or both. It could be both. It could be people don't know what this is and how they're going to do it, and then you're going to need training. And then your objectives need to be performance-based objectives, not academic learning objectives. There's a difference there, right? If you put in there, define this, define what this means, well, how is that going to help you when you're trying to do the work? Is that what you're going to do when you're trying to do something? You're going to define something? No, you're going to do something. So your objectives are going to be very important, aligned to those needs. And then what you produce, what you create, and what you implement has to be aligned with those 2 items. So always check back and forth. And whatever modality you use, that's fine. But regardless of the issue, if you don't have those 3 alignments, it doesn't matter what you do. I mean, if your business needs are not identified, you're wasting your time. Right. If your performance objectives are not aligned to your business needs, then you're addressing the wrong thing. And if you produce something and you don't have any of those things, then what are you doing? So that's basically what it comes down to.
Well, I think we've solved most of the world's training challenges and questions today. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty good about things. And it's good. So if we have instructional designers and educators out there, corporate training leaders who are going to be seeing this, I think that getting connected to either of you is a good idea. So you can find them on LinkedIn, and we will be sharing this recording on LinkedIn and YouTube as well. I want to thank Julia and Alex for an hour and 15 minutes out of their day to spend with me and the audience. And if you two could hang on for just a second, I'm going to end the broadcast and then we will debrief. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day. And tomorrow, we have that very special guest, Uni Chase from IDEO. So talk to you.